Today we're going to be talking about secondary dominant and leading tone chords that lead to 5. I'm going to show you how to spell all these. If you haven't yet watched the lecture on secondary dominants and leading tone chords, you should really watch that before watching this video. This video is more technical in nature. It will show you the actual process of constructing these chords, and then I'll show you how to resolve some of these chords as well when writing them in chord progressions. So the first thing you need to know, let's say you have to write a secondary dominant, a 5 of 5. So the way you do that, let's just start with C major. You can do this the long way at first, and that I think is helpful because it allows you to go through and see the entire process, and hopefully that'll give you a better understanding. But essentially, what we're doing here is if we're in the key of C major, and we want to write a 5 of 5, in C major, then what you're doing is you're using the C major scale at first. You're going to the 5th scale degree. You build a triad on that scale degree. So that would be your dominant chord in the key of C. Then that triad creates a temporary tonicization in the key of G because G is the root of that chord. So what you are essentially doing is you're changing the key signature and you're writing a G major scale. So G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp. And then in order to write a 5 of 5, in the key of C, this 5 chord is your 5. In order to write a 5 of 5, you have to go into the key of G and go to the 5th scale degree. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now what you do is you build a dominant triad on the 5th scale degree of G. So D, F sharp, and A. So what's effectively happening here is you're tonicizing the key of G temporarily to create a 5 of the 5 chord in C. So your 5 of 5 in C major is a D major triad. And all you have to do at this point is simply write a D major triad. And you use the key signature of C major to indicate that. So this, the way we'd write it, is 5 of 5. It's very simple. So the concept of secondary dominants isn't that complicated when you break everything down and you spell it out, but it can be a little bit confusing to find these chords when you're actually looking at a piece. So let's take a look at this. Let's say we're in the key of C major, and we see a major 2 chord, because that's what this 5 of 5 actually is, right? Find my eraser. There we go. So you're analyzing a piece of music and you have a 2 chord, a major 2 chord. If you know that this 2nd scale degree in C major is a minor triad, then you'll know right away that this 2 chord, there's something wrong with that. So it cannot be a 2 chord. And if you remember from the lecture, I told you that anytime you see a major 2 chord, you immediately should start thinking there's something strange about that in C major. So what you have to do is you have to figure out what's actually going on. And then if you understand secondary dominants, the first place you should go anytime you see a major 2 chord is to the secondary dominant theory. So then all you do is you just basically, you've got your D major triad right here, D, F sharp, and A. Go a 5th below that, so you get the note G, and then go a 5th below that, so you get the note C. So this tells you that you have a 5 of 5 in C. So that's one way to figure out what you're actually dealing with in an actual composition. So let's do a few more of these. Let's go ahead and do a 5 of 5 in A minor. So the first thing I need to do, I'm going to do it in the bass clef. First thing you got to do is write in your key signature. The key of A minor obviously has no sharps and no flats, but I want to write a 5 of 5. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go to the fifth scale degree of A minor. So here's our A minor scale. You can just use a natural minor scale. You go to the fifth scale degree. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So you see that the fifth scale degree of A minor is E. So now you use the key of E minor and you build another scale. Well, actually, you're just going to use a key signature. We don't need to write in the accidentals. And you go to the fifth scale degree of E minor. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you need to build a 5 chord on B. So we've got B, D, F sharp. So that's a minor triad. In order to make it major, you got to raise the third, which is your leading tone. So a 5 of 5 in A minor is going to be B, D sharp, and F sharp. Pretty simple. So let's just do a few more. Let's do a 7th chord because you can have a 5, 7, a 5 as well. So let's go ahead and do B major. Actually, let's do B flat major. So I'm going to write in a treble clef. We'll do one in the bass, one in the treble clef. Then I'm going to write in my key signature, so B flat and E flat. So now I write out my B flat scale. I can just use a key signature for this. I'm going to do it in the treble clef. So I go to the fifth scale degree, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's your dominant B flat. It's an F major triad. And then I have to go to the dominant of F major. So do a B flat. And then I have to go to the fifth scale degree of F, which is the C here. And you just build a triad on C. Now if I want to do a 7th chord, I have to add the B flat on top. So what ends up happening here, if I'm in the key of B flat major, and I want to write a 5 of 5, I have to use the dominant of F major. So I write in my notes now. So I've got C, E natural, because there's an E flat in the key signature, G, and then B flat. So that's a 5 of 5 in the key of B flat. So hopefully you understand how to create secondary dominants now. Now, obviously, you don't have to write out these two scales in order to figure it out. But if you're having any trouble at all, use this process because it will make your life so much easier if you just do it this way. And I'm just going to throw this out there. In the lecture, I talked about how you can actually move to a 5 of 2, 5 of 3. You can move to other scale degrees other than 5. I'm going to show you how to do that in another lecture. Right now, we are just focusing on secondary dominants and leading tone chords that lead to 5. So now that we've done our secondary dominants, let's talk about secondary leading tone chords. I'm going to show you how to create those as well. So with the secondary leading tone chord, let's just go ahead and take C major. We'll make it simple again. Make that black. Okay, so in C major, I can write my key. I'm going to write out my C major scale to make my life a little bit easier, just so I can be very clear in this explanation. I'm not going to include the C on top. In order to figure out what a 7 of 5 is, I still have to go to my 5th scale degree of C. So that's G. So I'm still going to use the key of G to figure out my 7 chord. Okay, so if you write in all of your scale degrees, and then of course remember this is just scale degree 1 again, it's not scale degree 8, then I find that the 7th scale degree of G is an F sharp. So now all I have to do to write my leading tone chord of 5 is I just have to build a triad on the 7th scale degree. Now one thing I'm going to mention, in just about, well, it's not going to be every case, but in most cases you're going to see the diminished triad in first inversion. You can see this in root position. I'm not going to say that never happens, it does, but it's going to be less common than the first inversion triad. And that's mainly because this is a diminished triad. We typically want to write it in first inversion. 7th chords will be more commonly placed in root position, but those again will also more often than not be a first inversion triad. So I have the notes F sharp, A, and C. So I'm going to go ahead and write this in root position just so that you can see how this works. Just know that typically it's going to be in first inversion. So all I do is write F sharp, A, and C. So that's my leading tone of 5, my secondary leading tone chord, 7 of 5. And that's all you have to do. It's the same concept. You still use 2 scales. You've got your C major scale, or whatever scale you're dealing with, whatever key you're dealing with. And then you've got your tonicized key area. In this case, it's going to be G. So you've got C and G. So you're using the key signature of G major to write the 7th chord in G, but then you use the key signature of C, which gives you an accidental. So in this case, the F sharp. So let's just go ahead and do one more. We're going to do minor. So let's do this one in the bass clef. All right, so A minor. So one thing I will tell you, in minor, you're typically going to have a fully diminished 7th chord. In major, it's going to be a half diminished 7th chord. So in A minor, I wrote a 7 fully diminished 7 chord. So the first thing we have to do is we have to write out our A minor scale. Just going to do it in treble clef again. Okay, then you go to the 5th scale degree, so that's E. So we're going to now write a scale in E minor. And then we have to go to the 7th scale degree of E minor. So that is going to be D, F sharp, and A. But remember, we need our leading tone. So we have to raise this to make it a D sharp. You're not going to use the natural minor scale to create your leading tone chord in 7. So we need to have that D sharp there. So then all I do is I just write my chord out. So I've got D sharp, there's an F sharp because of the key signature, I've got an A, and then I have a C. And that's all there is to it. So you can do this in any key. You can do this with major, you can do it with minor, you can do it with a 7th chord, you can do it with a triad. There's lots of ways to do this, but this is the basic process that you should use. Again, just write out your primary key scale, A minor. And then when you write out your 2nd scale, the tonicized key area, essentially is what we're doing, then you need to write it in minor as well. If the first primary key is minor, then this guy needs to be minor as well. If it's major, you need to keep it major. So you've got to match the actual key with both the primary and the secondary key area. So that's really what's happening here, is here we have a primary key area of C, a secondary key area of G. Since we're usually not going to modulate, we generally don't change the key signature, we just use the secondary dominant because it usually only occurs for a brief period to intensify a dominant tonic cadence. So same thing here with minor, you've got A minor and a secondary key area of E. So that's why these are called secondary dominants or secondary leading tone chords, because they occur in the second key area, not the primary one. And most classical music pieces are going to come back, they pretty much always come back, to either the primary key area, or if it appears that it doesn't come back to the primary key area, chances are it actually does. What's happening is you're just in a mode of the primary key area. But all classical pieces start and end in the same key. That's kind of a defining characteristic of the classical period. All right, so let's go ahead and talk a little bit about how to resolve these chords. So I'm going to clear all this so we can start over. Okay, so when you need to resolve a chord, a secondary dominant, let's just go ahead and take A major. The first thing you have to do is you need your grand staff. So I'm going to go ahead and create my grand staff. Let's go ahead and do A major. So I'm going to do a 5, 7, a 5, and I'm going to resolve it to 5. Because let's think about it this way. What's happening here? You have an A major scale. That's your primary key area, right? Your secondary key area is going to start on E. Okay, so primary is A, secondary key area is E. So I want to resolve the 5, 7 of 5, which is right here, to a 5 chord in the primary key area, because the 5 chord in the primary key area is right here. It's the E chord, right? So the 5 chord in the primary key area is actually the 1 chord in the secondary key area. So what I'm doing when I'm resolving these secondary dominants is I'm using the secondary key area to essentially create a 5-1 progression in the key of E. But when you translate these two chords into the key of A, what you actually have is a 5, should have made a 7 over there, a 5, 7 of 5 that resolves to 5. So this chord and that chord are going to be the same, and the 5 and the 1 chord are going to be the same as well. We're just using a secondary key area to have a dominant tonic relationship. And so what happens more often than not is you're using a secondary dominant to intensify the resolution of the 5-7 chord. So you move from 5-7 in a chord progression to 5, or 5-7 to 5, to the 5 chord, and then it resolves to 1, and you're back on the tonic in A major, or whatever key you happen to be in. So that's all that's happening here. So because of this, the resolutions stay the same. If you have a 5, 7 of 5 moving to 5, you need to make one chord complete and the other incomplete, just like when we had 5, 7 to 1. Because that's a root position triad, we need to make one of the chords complete and one of them incomplete. You can either make the 5-7 complete or the 1 complete. And if you make one of them complete, it's going to make the other one incomplete. So same resolutions as the 5-to-1 cadences. This is why early on, when I was talking about how to resolve 5-to-1 chords, I talked to you about how these dominant tonic progressions are some of the most important progressions you will ever learn. It's because they keep coming back in different ways. In this case, they come back as secondary dominant resolutions. So if you already know how to resolve your 5-7 to 1 chords, or your 5-to-1 chords, you know how to resolve your secondary dominants as well. So let's go ahead and work this one out. So we're in the key of A major, so I need a key signature. Always write in your key signature. And then the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write in the bass line, just like I did previously. So 5, 7 to 5, the bass is going to be here, your B. So I'm going to go ahead and put a B in right here. And then I'm going to go ahead and put my 5 in the key of A right here. So I've got my 5, 7 to 5 going to 5 now. Now remember, if it helps you, this is something that I highly encourage. So your 5, 7 to 5 chord is right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write B, D sharp, F sharp, and then I'm going to make it a seventh, so I'm going to add an A. So this is my 5, 7 to 5. So then I'm going to write in my E chord, E, G sharp, B. Now I know that I'm going to have to double the root of my 5 chord, so I'm going to write in a second E there. So we need to leave either a chord tone out of the 5, 7 to 5 or the 5 chord. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to leave the 5th out of the 5, 7 to 5. So I'm just going to completely eliminate the F sharp so I don't accidentally use it. So now, because I got rid of one of those chords, I only have chord members, I only have 3 notes in the chord left. So I have to double the root. Remember, we always want to double that root in root position triads, and really in inversions whenever possible. So this means I'm going to have a second B in here. So I've got my B in the bass. I'm just going to go ahead and put my second B up here in the soprano. So since I already have a B here, I'm going to cross off one of my B's down here in my little chord. That way I don't use it again. And since I have a B in the soprano, I'm going to cross off the other B. And then for the 5 chord right here, I have an E, right? So I'm going to cross off one of my E's. That way I'm keeping track of all my chord members, and it makes it really easy for me to see what's left. So the next thing I want to do is I want to resolve my tonicized leading tone. So that's the 3rd of your 5, 7 to 5 chord. So I'm going to go ahead and cross off the D sharp, and I'm going to put the D sharp in the alto. So there's your D sharp. That's your leading tone. So I know that my leading tone always has to resolve up. So very conveniently, that takes care of my E here because the D sharp is going to resolve to E. So I mark off the E in the 5 chord, and I put my second E right here. So now I have my leading tone taken care of. So now I also still need to resolve the 7th, right? So the 7th of my chord is going to be an A. So I'm going to get rid of my A from my 5, 7 to 5 shorthand here. And I'm going to go ahead and put my A here in the tenor because it's the only voice that I haven't taken care of yet. And then I know that the 7th chord, the 7th of the chord, has to resolve down. So there's your 7th. It's going to resolve down to the G sharp. So I'm going to cross off my G sharp. Apparently I'm writing it in red. And then I look to see what chord members I have left, and lo and behold, I have a common tone. So I'm going to write my common tone there and hold it over. So I've just resolved a 5, 7 to 5 to 5. No problem, in the key of A major. So it's the same exact resolutions. If you have a 5 of 5, you'll just use the basic chord guidelines that we do to resolve our 5 moving to 1, our dominant triads moving to our tonic triads. And that's all there is to it. In order to do secondary leading tone chords to 5, let's go ahead and do one in C major. I'm going to try and make this one really easy. They're really not any more complicated than 5 of 5. Once you figure out the chord, you're in good shape. So let's go ahead and write our grand staff in. Start with that. This is in C major. And I'm going to do, let's just do the triad. I'm going to put it in first inversion because that's the most often way you're going to see it. So I need to do a 7 of 5 going to 5. So one thing I will point out in case this is not clear. A 5, 7 of 5 right here always goes to a 5 chord. It always goes to the chord that's on the other side of the slash mark, right? So if you have a 5, 7 of 4, if you had something like that, you'd actually have to go to a 4 chord, like this. It tells you need to resolve it to a 4 chord. And that's another way to test to see if you're actually dealing with secondary dominant. If this 5 doesn't go to 5, you may need to rethink what you're looking at because it might not be a secondary dominant. So here we've got a leading tone of 5. As expected, it's going to resolve to 5. So let's go ahead and write out our C major scale, just so we can have some shorthand here, make our life a little bit easier. So I'm going to use the 5th scale degree right here. That's going to be your 5, which is right here, this guy. And then I'm going to use the tonicized key area of G. And I have to create a diminished chord on 7, scale degree 7. But we want to make it a diminished triad. So we've got all of our notes here. We've got an F sharp, an A, and a C. That is a diminished triad. So now I have the 2 chords that I need for my progression. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my little shorthand here. So I'm going to have my F sharp, my A, and my C. And then I'm going to have my G, my B, and my D. So with leading tone chords, for the 5 chord, you're going to still want to double the root. This is our 5 chord. It's in root position. For our diminished triad, for our secondary leading tone chord, if you remember, you don't want to double the root of a diminished triad. You typically want to double the 3rd or the 5th. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and double the 5th. I'm doubling the 5th because it's a little less common, but you can absolutely double the 3rd. And you're just going to resolve these the same way you resolve other leading tone triads moving to a 1 chord. Okay? So now I've got all the chord members I'm going to use, and I'm ready to go ahead and put in my bass line. So in the key of C, I'm going to have an A in the bass. Why an A? Because it's first inversion. So I have to use the 3rd of the chord for the bass. And then I'm going to resolve it down by step. So I've got my A and my G. So I'm going to go ahead and cross off my A, and I'm going to cross off one of my G's. So now I need to make sure I resolve the leading tone. So I'm going to take care of that right now. The leading tone is the F sharp, and it's going to go to the other G. So I'm going to cross those off. I'm going to put in my F sharp. Just going to move straight up for this particular progression. This is your leading tone. Make sure you always mark these. I want to see these marked when you turn in these assignments. So there's your leading tone. So then I'm going to go ahead and deal with my C, at least one of my C's. And I'm going to go ahead and put my C here in the alto. And then I'm also going to have a C in the soprano. That may look a little bit weird because we basically have a diminished fifth between the tenor and the alto, and then an octave between the alto and the soprano. But that tends to be what happens with this particular chord progression. You could put the F sharp in between the 2 C's if you wanted to, and then move the C down to the tenor. So anyway, we're going to move our C. It's basically going to resolve 2 ways. One of these C's, going to cross both these out since we've used them, is going to go up to D, and one of them has to go down to B. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put my D here, and then I'm going to put my B here. And there it is. There's your leading tone, your secondary leading tone, moving to 5. And that's all you have to do. So then if you're doing a 7th, just remember to resolve the 7th down, and you'll be fine. Let's go ahead and do 1 7th chord, just so you can see it. Let's go ahead and do B flat major. Here's B flat and E flat, got to write in the key signatures. I can write my scales if it helps me. So I'm going to start with my primary key area. I'm going to go to the 5th scale degree, which is F, and I'm going to write in my secondary key area. And then since I'm writing, it's going to be a 7, fully diminished 6/5 of 5, and is going to resolve to 5. Since I'm basically writing this chord progression, I need to use a 7th scale degree of F major. So that would be here, right there on that E. And I need to build a 7th chord. So I'm going to have an E natural, a G, a B flat, which is in the key, but I'm going to write it here so I don't make a mistake. And then in order to make this a fully diminished triad, a 7th chord, I need to make that a D flat. Okay, so now I have my 2 chords. So what I can do here is I can create my little diagram. Right on my 5 chord. So I need to have F, A, and C. And then for this leading tone, or secondary leading tone, I need to use this chord here. So I've got E, G, B flat, and D flat. So again, since I'm writing this in an inversion, I can use all the chord members. It's the same rules for resolving leading tone chords. There actually is one exception, which I'm going to get to after this, but let's go ahead and deal with this first. So for the 5 chord, we still want to double the root, so I'm going to add an extra F there, so I have 4-part harmony in both. Okay, so first I need to write my leading tone of 5. I need to follow my Roman numerals and write in the bass line. So I'm going to start with the 3rd right here, because it's first inversion. So I'm going to cross out that G, and I'm going to put it here. And then I'm going to take that down to an F. So I'm going to cross out an F to make sure that I've already used it. So now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to go and resolve my 7th, because I actually just want to put my 7th in the alto, because I'm crazy like that. And I'm going to make it in red. So I know my 7th has to resolve down by step, so that also takes care of my C. So then I'm going to do my leading tone, and you know what? I'm going to do that in red as well. So this is an E natural, there's an E flat in the key signature, which means I got to indicate that that's natural. I'm going to write that it's my leading tone, and it has to resolve up to F. So that gets rid of my other F. So I'm only left with 2 tones. I've got a B flat and an A. Go back to black here. So there's your B flat, and it just resolves down to A. Very simple. So there is one more thing I'm going to show you. Normally, in tonal music, if you have a 5/7 chord, or even a 5 chord, it resolves to 1, right? It doesn't resolve to a 1/7 chord. But when you're dealing with secondary dominants, you're in a secondary key area, and you can get away with a little more. So you can actually have a 5/7 of 5 that moves to a 5/7. Now, why is that weird? If you don't know the answer, pause this video for a second and think about this. Why would a 5-7-5 go into a 5-7 be weird? You've got two 5-7 chords in a chord progression. So go ahead and pause the video if you need to, and I'm going to tell you the answer in just a minute. Okay, so we're going to work this out. I'm going to show you the reason if you don't know. So if you're in the key of C, you have your C major scale. Here's the 5th scale degree. I would normally build a triad, right? And then I use my secondary key area to find my 5 chord of G. I'm going to make it a 7th chord, right? So I've got D, F sharp, A, C. That's my 5-7-5. So I'm going to go ahead and write that here. And then I want to resolve it to a 5-7. Well, remember, the 5-7 in the key of C is this chord here, which is also the tonic of this chord here. So effectively, what's happening is in the tonicized key area, you have a major minor 1 chord. And here you have your typical 5-7, which of course you know is also major minor. So that's weird because we would never want to resolve 5-7 to a 1-7. And we especially wouldn't want to change a key signature to make the 7th natural, flat, essentially it's natural in this key, but we won't want to make it flat, so we'd have a major minor 7 chord. It would normally be a 1-7 chord that would be major. So what we're effectively doing is we're having a 5-7 to 1-7 chord progression. And you can get away with that because it's a secondary key area. So now, because I brought this up, I'm going to go ahead and show you how this would actually work in reality if you were to write a 5-7 of 5 to 1 progression. So let's get rid of all this. And then that will be the last thing we do today. Okay, so here's your treble clef. Got to write our grand staff. We're going to do this in the key of C, since I've already written this out in C. So first of all, I need to have a 5-7 of 5, and then I need to have a 5-7 chord. And then I'm just going to complete this progression because it's going to end on a 1 chord. So let's go ahead and make this in 3/4. We'll use quarter notes. Getting all kinds crazy today. All right, so first we need to fill in the bass line. So the 5-7 of 5 is right here. It's D, F sharp, A, and C. So first of all, when resolving 5-7 of 5 to 5-7, you're going to leave out the 5th of the 5-7 chord. So let's go ahead and create our chords. So we've got our 5-7 of 5. That's going to be D, F sharp, A, and C. Okay, now let's draw our 5-7. So remember, we're doing a 5-7 in the key of C. So I've got the notes G, B. I'm going to leave out the 5th, so I'm not going to have a D, and I'm going to have an F natural. So which of these chord members are you going to double? If you said the root, you nailed it. So then we need to resolve the 5-7 to a 1 chord. So a 1 chord in the key of C is going to be C, E, and G. And we need to double the root for the 1 chord as well. So now I've got my 3 chords that I'm going to be using. Let's get rid of all this extra information. Make this really clear to see. Okay. Now that we've cleaned up our space a little bit, let's go ahead and resolve this. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to write in the bass line. So I need a D here. I'm going to go up to a G here, and then I'm going to come down to a C. There's my bass line. So let's get rid of these notes so we don't accidentally use them again. Here's the D, get rid of that, get rid of one of these G's, and get rid of one of these C's. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go to my next voice. So I'm going to go ahead and put the A, the fifth of the 5-7-5 chord, in the tenor. And I'm going to cross that off so I don't use it again. Then I'm going to go ahead and put my F sharp in the next voice. So you've got your F sharp. So we have one more chord tone. This is your seventh. This is our leading tone. Just remember that. So I'm going to put my seventh in the soprano. Okay, so now my seventh has to resolve down. So I don't have any option other than to resolve this down to a B natural. So let's get rid of the B in the next chord. And then I already told you I want to have a perfect authentic cadence. So let's go from C down to B and back up to C. So we have a 7-1, scale degree 7 and 1. That gives us a perfect authentic cadence. And let's mark off our other C that we just used. Okay? Okay, so this is where it gets a little bit weird. There's a reason I didn't resolve my leading tone yet. The leading tone, this F sharp here, it would normally resolve up to the G. That's how the leading tone resolves. But when you have a 5-7-5 going to a 5-7 in a secondary key area, the leading tone doesn't have to resolve. What it does is it actually just comes down by a half step to F natural. Now, you may be thinking, why can't I just resolve to G? If you resolve to the G, which would be this note here, right? Then the G's taken. This A now has to move to an F, and that would be a leap. That would create a really rough sounding progression, because anytime you have a leap and you don't move by step, it creates for a less than perfectly smooth chord progression. So we don't want to leap. So instead what we do is this A just comes down to the G. So let's go ahead and mark off this G now because we've used it. And what that leaves, I've already written it in, but what that leaves is the leading tone has to come down by step. And that's okay, because essentially what you're doing is a sharp 4, talked about this in the lecture, a natural 4, and then, do you remember where it resolves from the lecture? It resolves to 3. So I just have to take this down to the third scale degree, right here. So you've got to remember that sharp 4, 4, 3. You've got to remember that that's how it resolves when you have these secondary dominants. So then I have only one chord member left in my one chord, my G. So I'm going to hold the common tone over, and that is how you'd resolve a 5-7-5 going to 5-7. If it was in minor, just make sure you have your leading tone. Make sure that B here, this guy, is natural. And that's it. That is everything you need to know for this week. Now, next week, we're going to get into, or it'll actually be the next lecture once this has been posted, we're going to get into how to resolve to scale degrees other than 5. For today, we just resolved to scale degrees using a secondary key area that starts on the 5th scale degree. Next week, we start to get into some more advanced stuff. So that's it.